Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. It's nice again. Feels good, doesn't it? For those of us who are in the Massachusetts, New England vicinity, it's very nice because the warm weather is upon us. This is a Massachusetts and New England-based true crime, regional history, and advocacy-focused podcast. I created it. I research it. I write it. I record it. I edit it. I release it. I promote it. It's all me. Thanks so much to the show supporters who help keep this going. I sent a message out via Patreon about new merch with the logo refresh. I will have more on how you can support the show later. There is a lot of noise going on around here. The Karen Read trial got underway, the second one. I don't have a hard stance on it. I don't follow it religiously like a lot of other people do. I said what I said. And a reminder to that dip who left a review a while back about how I tore her down, Karen Read, you were wrong. You didn't listen to the show. In related news, the internet is in a twist about a serial killer in New England, rather Facebook, or a Facebook group. Of this theory, I say no. There are no solid connections, not yet. I remain a skeptic. And thanks to Bob Ward of Boston 25 News for helping out on that one. In this episode, I talk about a case that remains unsolved 6 years on. A case based on the South Shore of a missing woman, a mom, a grandmother, a sister, a friend. There is a lot of noise around this case. And I'd like to put the focus on her and the facts of her disappearance. It does need clarity. This is episode 85. The case of missing person Sandra Crispo from Quincy, Mass. Now, Sandra moved to the small town of Hanson shortly before she disappeared, and her daughter Lena tells her story. Sandra Crispo grew up in Quincy. She was one of 5 children in the Dabrowski family. Stephen M. Dabrowski Sr., their father, passed away in January 2018 at the age of 84. He lived in House Neck in Quincy for more than 50 years, and he raised his family there. Now, as I do with this show, I learned a lot about that area while researching this story. Let's talk about Quincy, or Quincy to locals. According to the site Coastal Neighborhoods, House Neck is a small waterfront neighborhood that sits on a peninsula surrounded by Quincy Bay, Hingham Bay, and Rock Island Cove. The area is rich in history, named for Atherton Howe, the mayor of Boston, England, who was granted the land in 1636 as both a farm and an orchard. Today, locals refer to the community as the Neck, or God's country, and are proudly referred to as Neckas. I don't know, proudly might be a stretch. It sits on the water with a view of the Boston skyline. On the tip of the neck sits Nut Island, and yes, I am suppressing all my inappropriate jokes. It is the national park where residents enjoy views of Squantum, one of the most desirable addresses in Quincy, with its $1 million homes. There's Wollaston Beach off Quincy Shore Drive, with the Quincy Shore Reservation and its 2.3-mile beach popular for its bike trails. You know, I've said this from time to time. This show can't be too bad for New England tourism. I talk up our towns and cities quite a lot. Quincy is the 8th largest city in Massachusetts, with 101,163 residents in 2025. That's according to World Population Review. Quincy is part of Norfolk County. It's called the City of Presidents and the birthplace of the American dream. Quincy is the birthplace of the 2nd and 6th U.S. presidents, John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams. It was also part of the developing granite industry for more than a century. Home to America's commercial railway, the Granite Railway, built in 1826 with the express purpose of transporting Quincy granite to Charlestown for the construction of the Bunker Hill Monument. Quincy Quarry and the Granite Workers Museum hosts a walking tour discussing the history of the Quincy quarries. And I should add that my friend Kristen, who was born and raised and still lives in Quincy, told me that the quarries are mentioned in The Departed, the movie, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the show. My father-in-law worked in the ships in the Quincy shipyard. It was rough work. Small spaces riddled with asbestos. He developed COPD as a result, and at almost 89, he's hanging in there. He tells us lots of stories. His family had a bakery in the West End of Boston before they leveled that neighborhood to build Mass General Hospital, and it displaced thousands of families. There used to be a sign on Starrow Drive right near that site that said this: if you lived here, you'd be home now. Yeah, no shit, we know. They did live there, and you kicked them out and stole their homes. I've talked about it in other episodes, namely the 2 episodes I did about the Coconut Grove fire. The Four River Shipyard was in operation from 1883 until 1980. The shipyard produced hundreds of ships, including destroyers and aircraft carriers. Asbestos was used for several decades of the shipyard's history. And as a result, many people developed asbestos-related diseases like mesothelioma, COPD. Today, the United States Naval Shipbuilding Museum and the USS Salem occupy the former shipyard grounds and are open to the public. The USS Salem serves as home to the "Kilroy was here" catchphrase. The phrase is believed to have originated with James Kilroy, a shipyard inspector in Quincy. During the war, Kilroy would mark sections he had inspected with "Kilroy was here" to indicate his work. American soldiers quickly adopted this practice, and it grew in popularity. And the band Styx named a record after it. That record's biggest hit, do you know? This is for the older crowd of listeners. Mr. Roboto, you're right. Now, I worked in radio for a long time, and I know for sure that the purest of the Styx fans didn't love that one. Many found it kind of quirky and goofy, but it became one of their biggest hits. Now, it's a Boston thing to make fun of our most successful exports. I say that about the Dropkick Murphys, but despite all my razzing, the Dropkicks are known to show up for us. Formed in Quincy in 1996, they came together on a dare when Ken Casey accepted the challenge to form a band in very little time. He didn't play anything when he started the band. And their almost meteoric rise to a level of success in such little time kind of baffled locals in the beginning. The band took their name from a local man named John Dropkick Murphy, a known wrestler. He also operated the Bellows Farm Sanatorium in Acton, something Ken Casey called a primitive detox center. In a piece for Boston Magazine, he said, "I always heard old guys my grandfather's age say, 'Oh, I was in Dropkicks,' or 'they took me to Dropkick Murphys.'" And he thought that would be a cool name for a band. And the rest, as they say, is rock and roll history, sort of. They rehearsed in the basement of a barbershop, and they got their big break from another well-known Boston band, Mighty Mighty Bosstones, when they were invited to open up for their 1997 tour. And the Dropkicks paid their respects to the Beachcomber when that dive bar on Wollaston Beach shut down in 2015. After 56 years, they gave him a proper send-off for its final show. Quincy, Massachusetts is the birthplace of Howard Johnson's HoJos. Now, I learned a lot about the history of Howard Johnson's, let me tell you. Founded by Howard Deering Johnson when, in 1925, he bought the drugstore he had been working at on Beale Street in Wollaston. He stepped it up in his homemade ice cream, adding butterfat and higher quality ingredients. He saw trends in business, and he expanded with an ice cream stand on Wollaston Beach, next to the home he was leasing for the summer. Legend has it he sold as many as 14,000 cones in a single day at that stand. That seems humanly impossible. I mean, how much homemade ice cream could he churn out in 1925? I don't know. By 1929, he opened the first traditional Howard Johnson's restaurant in Quincy Square to a booming business. Then, that stock market crash of October 1929 kicked off the Great Depression and nearly crushed his business altogether. HoJos survived, and in the coming years, Johnson took a leap. In 1935, he had the idea for a new restaurant in Orleans, on the Cape, on the plot of land owned by Eugene Sprigg. It was located where Route 28 met Route 6A. It was a prime location for the hordes of motorists who drove by or sat in Cape traffic. He struck a deal with Sprigg and a franchise was born. OrleansHistory.com has a photo called The Birthplace of Franchising. In 1939, there were 107 Howard Johnson's locations. By 1954, the company opened its first motel in Savannah, Georgia. It grew to include more than 1,000 franchise restaurants and 500 motor lodges. The Verb Hotel in the Fenway, a former HoJos. Anyone remember the huge HoJos on Route 3 in Nashua, New Hampshire? With the pool, I remember the fogged up windows. It was one of 2 HoJos in Nashua. The other was Daniel Webster Highway area. I don't quite remember. I found the site HoJoland.com. Let me tell you, I could go on and on about the history of Howard Johnson's, but I won't. Quincy, Massachusetts is the birthplace of Dunkin' Donuts. The first Dunkin's is still in operation. The first of its kind coffee and donut shop opened in Quincy in 1948. Originally named Open Kettle, it served coffee, pastries, and sandwiches. 2 years later, it was renamed Dunkin' Donuts. As folklore has it, an architect was inspired by the idea of dunking donuts into coffee. 4 years later, founder William Rosenberg had 5 locations in operation. That original Dunkin' Donuts is still standing and was restored to its 1950s glory, complete with a retro sign. Love 'em or hate 'em, Dunks is huge, selling billions of cups of coffee each year. Dunkin' sells at least 60 cups of coffee every second. That equates to approximately 2 billion cups of coffee sold worldwide in 2017. Boop. Ben Affleck loves Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, the guy is a super millionaire, and he still goes and gets his lodge regular. And yes, having a Dunks across the street from a Dunks is a very Boston kind of thing. And when I say Boston, it's a local thing. Outside of here, I don't think anybody gives a care. Here's a quick story about no one really giving a care outside of Boston. I was in California, and there are a couple that I go to. There's one in Encino that I go to when I'm there, and there was one in the one in Woodland Hills I was staying close to. So I walk into this new Dunkin' Donuts, because they're pretty much all new out there. And I walk in, I went, oh my God. I said it out loud, and the woman behind the counter was like, what is this woman's problem? And I'm like, it's just like the olden days of Dunkin' Donuts with all the donuts in the display. It looked beautiful. I'm being nostalgic with, I'm from Boston, and this is like the old school when they used to make the donuts and put them in the display case, and it was so cool. And I could see in the woman's eyes, she's like, whatever, freak. I got my coffee with 10 skim milk. I turned around to leave, and I yelled, Yankees suck. Let's talk about some of the notable people from Quincy. Lots of Adamses and Quincy Adamses, and actress Lee Remick, the legendary Dick Dale, surf rock pioneer, Grammy-nominated producer, engineer, and songwriter Louis Bell. You may not know his name, but you do know Post Malone's and Justin Bieber's and Taylor Swift's and Cardi B's. Something I did not know until this very day. Jonathan Bartlett Allen, known professionally as Mr. Ballen, the true crime podcast host, grew up in Quincy. I did hear that he had a relative who wrote for the Boston Globe, and I figured out he's the guy with the backwards baseball hat. So that all tracks. The actress named Clara Blandick, she rose to stardom for her portrayal as Auntie Em in The Wizard of Oz. You may remember her from the earliest scenes with Dorothy, played by Judy Garland. And then much later, I'm trying to remember Wizard of Oz. It's been quite a while since I watched it. Clara grew up in Quincy. Her story takes a very sad turn, though, when on April 15th, 1962, the pain of arthritis and failing vision became too much. She returned home from Palm Sunday church services, set out her acting credentials and press clippings, placed a plastic bag over her head, and took a fatal dose of sleeping pills. She died at peace on her sofa at the age of 85. The note she left spoke of her agonizing pain and her impending blindness. I also learned that many of the Wizard of Oz cast have Massachusetts connections. I won't laundry list that here for you now, but I do share the link among my sources at crimeofthetruestkind.com. You can go there and learn about the history of Howard Johnson's. At HoJo Land. That's just some of what I learned about Quincy that I shared with you today. And Sandra Crispo lived much of her life there, only moving to Hanson a few months before she went missing. I have talked about the town of Hanson, where Maura and Julie Murray grew up. It is a small town of about 10,000 people. I did visit, most recently was for the funeral service for Julie's brother, Fred Murray Jr., who passed away very recently. Oh, and by the way, there are no new discoveries, no breaking headlines in Maura's case. That is absolute clickbait bullshit. And when there is, the Murrays will tell you. On Wednesday, August 7th, 2019, 54-year-old Sandra Crispo was seen for the last time on surveillance at Cumberland Farms near her home. She stopped to get cigarettes on her way back from leaving her car at the garage for repairs. Sandra, who was taking care of her grandsons while her daughter worked in the city, was home when her son-in-law came to pick up their kids after his workday. He helped Sandra drop her car off at a mechanic and gave her a ride back to her place. Her tiny house at 47 Spofford Ave in Hanson was what we would call quaint, in what realtors call a condo alternative. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, 612 square feet, a postage stamp yard. Great spot, close to her daughter, and a spot she got to enjoy for all of 3 months. A series of unanswered calls began when Lena, her daughter, tried her mom on Thursday. Those calls went unanswered. By Friday morning, August 9th, when Lena arrived to drop off her children before work, her mom was not around. Something that concerned her immediately. Sandra watched her grandchildren 3 days a week and had planned to keep them overnight that Friday. When Lena arrived, she found the lights were on, the air conditioning was still running, and the back door was unlocked. But Sandra's dog, Clarance, he was there. He was scared. In her first look around, she noticed that his bowls were empty. Now, Lena knew her mother would never have left her dog behind without telling anyone, and she wouldn't have left her house unlocked. And the last items tossed in the trash were diapers from Wednesday when Sandra last had her grandchildren. Weeks would pass with no sign of Sandra. Searches turned up nothing. Weeks after Sandra's disappearance, Lena and her husband Tim testified before a grand jury. Her understanding was that they were pretty close to making an arrest. But no one has been arrested yet. I mentioned Sandra's father at the beginning, Stephen Dabrowski Sr., who died in 2018, almost 2 years before Sandra went missing. He left behind a substantial estate, which included up to $1 million in gold bars. It has been a long-standing problem within the family. When you hear something like gold bars, you think, well, that's weird. What's the value in that? When I thought about how older people looked at banks and investing, it does make sense to me. During the Great Depression, people lost everything. Banks lost everything. This estate and these gold bars have been a long-standing problem within the family, and something many close to Sandra believe made her a target. I first met Lena at the Massachusetts State Police Unresolved Case Unit's Missing Persons Day in East Boston earlier this year. We spoke about her mom's case, this underlying story that there are some unsavory players that continue to drive a narrative. This is about a missing woman, Sandra Crispo, a woman whose entire second act was about being a grandmother to her grandsons. Sandra lived in that small cottage in Hanson, and neighbors shared that they had heard a loud argument the night Sandra disappeared. In that small but tidy house, Lena would eventually find droplets of blood on the bed, on the walls. Up next, my conversation with Laina, Sandra Crispo's daughter, who tells us about her mom's life, what was most important to her, and the parts of her story that no one ever talks about. Please support crime of the truest kinds, and there are a number of ways that you can do that. You can share the show. Tell a friend about it. Share it in the groups or the threads that you post in. Share it on social media. Become a patron. 4 tiers starting at just $1 at patreon.com. Drop a tip in the jar. You will be giving the dogs a bone. I have a lot of dogs, and they need a lot of bones. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Buy some merch. Hit up the merch store. Everything is linked at crimeofthetruestkind.com. Your support helps drive this show. It supports the work that I do, the conferences and events I attend, and the victim advocacy training that I am taking right now. Thank you.
Getting justice for my mom, which has been my only mission throughout all of this, is finding out what happened, keeping it in the media, as hard as it may be. It's not easy putting yourself up there, and and try to keep it relevant, the best I can. I'm just doing the best I can for what I got, and it's been a lot.
I know. And that's why I say to you, you know what? If any point you want to pull the plug on this and wait till later, I am at the mercy of whatever you do and don't want to do. People in your situation get re-victimized again and again and again. Not only were you victimized by the fact that your mother's missing, you feel like you have a lot of the answers.
Right.
And you're like screaming into the void.
Right.
And I see that a lot. First of all, I wish we didn't have to do this. I wish I haven't been learning this and finding out that families like yours have this common thread of what the fuck?
Right.
Quite
Right.
literally, what the fuck? What else do I have to do to get you people to listen to me?
And I actually appreciate you for acknowledging that, because it, and in a sense, makes me feel a little better, because it feels so isolating to go through this. And you feel like you don't really have resources and people to reach out to. But
I struggle with as somebody who tries to advocate. I really want the firsthand account of a family member. That's where your mom gets lost.
exactly, she is lost in all of this.
So let's start here. Tell me about your mom. Where did she grow up? What was her life like? What are some of the stories that you know about your mom's earlier life? Because these are the things that we never hear about. We never hear about the person.
Right. Absolutely. Well, she was one of four. They grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts. My grandfather was a bricklayer growing up. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, but she suffered from mental illness. So I know that their upbringing wasn't ideal. I know that there's, internal family drama, which has been there since day one. But, all in all, she grew up in that environment. Met my dad when she was about 19. They got married, had my brother, and then 2 years later they had me. And we grew up in Quincy. My dad was a commercial lobsterman, and my mom would work on the boat with him. And we would be out there in the sun and getting our little aquarium. He would throw up baby lobsters, and we really did have a good upbringing in the younger years. And then she started, that was the opiate epidemic, and she got addicted to OxyContin, from a former fisherman that she worked with. And she struggled for a long time. She was very depressed and had her own troubles. I actually, my grandmother got custody of me when I was 15. So I moved in with her. And I kind of had this a little bit of resentment towards my mom, because I felt like she wasn't there for me when I needed her the most. And
Right.
it was really hard, but ultimately we made it through. And I realized as an adult that I have children now, and I figured I would give her the second chance to be in my life and be active with my kids, and she loved it, honestly. Like that was her passion. She wasn't career oriented. She didn't have any real big goals. She was just simple. She really was. She was simple. She loved tea. She loved her dog. Didn't have a big circle of friends, like mainly hang out with her sisters, mainly just kept to herself. But yeah, like I said, we did reconnect, when I became a mom and realized that life is short and everybody deserves second chances. And she loved being a grandmother. She really, really did. Like those boys are her life. So yeah, it's been a lot.
She was living in Quincy for a while, and then she sell her house in Quincy and then buy the house in Hanson?
Yeah, so my grandfather passed away in 2017, and then she had this big, four-bedroom house in Quincy, and you know, he was pretty much supporting her, like paying the bills. So she was left his house. So we decided to downsize and move her closer to Hanson. So we got her a cute little, 700 square foot house. It was all recently renovated. Like she was happy. It wasn't anything crazy, but it was enough it's all she needed. And for the first time, I felt like she had something that was hers. And it was almost like a new outlook on life. And, despite her having her issues in the past, I feel like this, was a really good time for her right prior to her disappearance.
Hmm. Tell me about the dynamic among her siblings. She's one of four siblings. So one brother, three sisters?
She had a brother who passed away in the 90s.
Mm.
He had AIDS and he was gay.
Oh my
And he
God.
was never accepted by his father. So he took his own life. One of four now.
Of the five siblings, where does your mom fall?
Second to youngest.
She was raised in a big family where, I mean, I came from a family of five, so I know that it can be chaotic.
Yeah.
She had you and your brother pretty young.
Yes. Yeah.
What were the early years like for all of you?
Honestly, she was very hands on. She was very crafty. Like, she was never afraid to do fun projects. Again, she really didn't have any extra passions. Like, she was a homebody and she liked it that way. And, she enjoyed being a mother and she was present growing up. And
At what point in your childhood was she working on the lobster boats?
the majority of it, she used to bait like long line hooks. Like, she was a worker. She was right in the seafood industry, and I watched her for years, and my dad and her both were extremely hard workers, and they did everything they could and provided for us for what we needed. And
Is your dad still around?
yeah, he's a bricklayer now. He got out of that industry, but he's around. Yeah, he lives in Quincy.
Has he been supportive of you and your family throughout this?
See, I don't really think, he struggles with alcoholism, and
Yeah.
I don't think he really knows how to, not that emotional. It's a lot for him. I don't think he ever stopped loving her. He since remarried, but, they had a very amicable split. There was no animosity, anything like that.
Did they separate because of the drugs?
Yeah, I think that definitely put a strain on their relationship. And, my dad ultimately moved out. So it was just my brother and I. And then, I think moving in with my grandmother was, she regrets not taking my brother also, but he was a little bit older. And, it's kind of hard to restart a life at, in your adolescent ages when it's already fragile and, a lot going on.
How is your brother doing?
My brother has struggled with substance abuse.
Mhm.
I actually adopted his child. So I had three boys under the age of two. I check in with him every once in a while, but we really don't have a close relationship. I think he's more ashamed of his decisions, and I would never judge. Like, I get it. Everybody is affected by somebody with substance abuse and mental health.
It's very important to say this, that it affects anyone.
100%.
A stay at home mom, a teacher, a principal, a CEO, a high school student. Drugs affect everyone. And if anybody looks around and says, well, that doesn't happen to me or that won't happen to me, just wait.
It doesn't discriminate. Sad, and that's the reality we live in.
And that's something that's important for me to point out is that I don't care what somebody's history is. If they're missing, we need to find them.
Right. If anything, it only makes them, more of a liability and a concern.
The vulnerability is greater.
Right. She had periods of sobriety, like, obviously during the later half, but I think she just always struggled with, self doubt. And I think she never really thought she was good enough. And,
Mhm.
that was kind of hard to see. But again, like I said, being a grandmother kind of gave her this new perspective, a purpose, essentially, like something to look forward to. And she was really good at it.
Sometimes that's what happens in someone's second act, right?
Right.
I can speak from experience in my own family. Sometimes our parents aren't great parents, but their journey makes them better grandparents.
Right. And we have to learn to evolve. We're not here to parent our parents. We're here to grow and hopefully
Right.
not repeat mistakes or anything. Nobody's perfect.
That's right. Nobody's perfect. Talk to me about what you know about the last days before she disappeared. What was going on to the best of your ability? What was going on in her day to day and leading up to the last time that she was seen?
Well, I think since my grandfather passed in 2017, there was a huge rip in the family. A lot of people seemed very money motivated, a lot of greed. I single handedly witnessed this whole thing, destroy my family in more ways than one. But day to day, prior to her disappearance, she was living in her small home in Hanson. She seemed happy. She had her dog. We were talking plans to put a fence in for the boys. She was honestly the happiest that she's been that I've witnessed. But again, there was that constant tension there, that constant bickering back and forth, family members arguing about inheritance and all over my head. It's something that I tried to stay away from because again, they've been perseverating on it since prior to her disappearance. And now looking back, things start to click and things start to make sense and you realize all these people that were around all the time, now nobody's around, nobody's talking about it. It's almost like they're squirreling and it doesn't seem right. It seems sad, but the reality is that a little bit of money destroys normal families, and we're talking about a lot of money potentially, and we're talking about a family that struggles with mental health and substance abuse. Those combinations alone aren't great, but ultimately, our goal is to continue to seek justice, to continue to seek, the truth, and find out what happened to Sandra.
And that last day was like most days.
Yes.
She was getting her car worked on.
It was a typical, yeah, it was Wednesday, August 7th. I'll never forget. I started in a new department, so I wanted my children at our house extra early. I worked in the city like 11 to 11, so I got there at like 9:30. She came to the front door. Her dog is very hyper
Kind
and
of
would literally,
doggy.
he was like a lab mutt mix from the pound that she adopted, and she loved him. His name was Clarance, but he was very flighty. So that morning in particular, I pulled in front of her house, got the boys out of the car, and they just kind of went in one by one. She's holding the dog. Typical morning, no concerns. I reported to work that day. We had prearranged her car to get fixed because the previous winter it got backed up into a snowbank, and when she pulled out, the whole exhaust ripped off, so her car sounded really loud. And I'm like, Mom, we cannot go into another season of a loud car. Like, let's fix your car. So she agreed. We went to the mechanic down my street. They took the car in. On that day, that Wednesday, my husband got out of work around 5, picked her up at her house, drove back to the mechanic shop. My mom followed him. Tim went in, talked to the mechanic, and then he drove her home. And before they got home, she wanted to stop at Cumberland Farms in Hanson. She was a smoker. So he said, yep, no problem. They're seen on surveillance pulling up. That's the last known images of her. He dropped her off around 5-ish. She got out of the car. She looked at him and the boys, and he said, say, I love you, Granny. And they were all like, I love you, Granny. She went in the house, called her cousin. They had plans to meet up that night because she didn't have to watch my kids Thursday. She only had to watch them Friday. Called her cousin, but they never ended up going down. That next day, the mechanic had called me. He said, XYZ. I said, if you see anything else, can you please fix it? Because she's probably not going to want to get it done. And he goes, Lena, I'm not looking for anything else. We're going to deal with the exhaust. I said, no problem. I'll call her. So I called her around noon. She didn't answer. And originally, I did kind of get this feeling that, why isn't she answering? She doesn't have a car. But also, it was a nice summer day. Who knows? She might have been outside in the yard walking the dog. And I get some criticism online. Well, if she had concerns, why didn't she go over there? I also had 4 kids with me, so me and the kids were at the beach. We came home. I fed them lunch. I proceeded to call her a couple more times. She didn't answer. And then before bed, it was 8:30. I called her. And again, no answer. And I reached out to family members. I'm like, have you heard from my mom? And they said, nope, I have not. I said, okay, well, she's supposed to watch my kids tomorrow and she's not answering. Let me know if you hear from her. So that next day was a Friday. And again, I called her before I left to go to her house. She didn't answer. So got there, pulled in the driveway. Normally I'm like to the kids, everybody unbuckle. And then we go in. I went to the front door. It was locked. And then I proceeded to go to the back door, and that was unlocked and opened. I kind of peered in, and normally that dog that's very flighty was kind of shaking on the recliner. And then I briefly looked, he had no food or water. And then I'm looking around, I'm like, the lights were on. So clearly she was there at night. The air conditioner was running. But I was just kind of in a frazzle. I have a brand new job. I can't call in on orientation. So I arranged childcare, dropped my kids off, and then I reported to work, and I just had this sinking feeling. I don't know how to explain it. I looked at one of my coworkers and I said, I feel like something's wrong with my mom. And she said she would never forget my desperation almost in my face. So I called my husband. I'm like, she wasn't there. So he reported her missing after work. Hanson police were very responsive initially. They put out all the stops. They made her a tier 2, which is essentially a child going missing. They searched pretty extensively the area around her house. They had canine, they had drones. They were out on ATVs. Since then, here we are 6 years later, and we still don't have answers, and we still don't know the truth.
When you were inside her house, did you see, aside from her puppy dog, whose situation was completely abnormal from the way your mom would take care of her dog,
Right.
what else do you remember from that initial, I guess, look around? You weren't in the mode of investigating at that point, because at that point,
No.
where's my mom? What's going on?
Right.
Did anything stick out to you at that moment?
Nothing initially other than, the dog. But again, I really didn't walk around or anything. It wasn't till, later on, police didn't process her house for evidence approximately 6 weeks later. It was after
Wow.
I was on my hands and knees kind of scouring for clues. And then that's where I kind of noticed there was droplets of blood in almost every room of her house, small, and not enough to be visible, whoa, a crime was committed here. So then I wrote to the DA's office. I said, I believe there's a public threat. It was 54 days in at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like Hanson needed more resources. I feel like, it's a small town. They're really not cut out for potential foul play and big cases. So I reached out to the DA's office. I got an immediate response. The state police kind of, came in and helped lead the investigation. I felt like there was a lot of progress within the case. We were convened shortly after they took over. We were convened for a grand jury where I've testified as a witness a few times. But again, it wasn't until after the fact that I realized there were small amounts of blood throughout almost her entire home. Like, I looked under the bed, all the bed slats were off. There was a straw purse and it had little drops, like somebody might have been looking for something. Her house initially was fine, but then when we went back, it appeared tossed. My husband went there that Saturday because she had the cat and the dog to feed them. And then certain family members came in and they were looking, they were like, where's the gold? And, very confrontational. And Tim's like, what do you mean, where's the gold? Where's Sandra?
Wow, that's very telling.
But again, looking back, they've been fighting about this gold since 2017. So 2 years later, all right, now you're going to talk about literally 6 days before she went missing. Somebody in my family texted me, I know she has the gold bars. I'm not going to mention what was exchanged, but looking back now, it's completely alarming and it all makes sense looking back now. I feel like this is a very solvable case. After the state police had processed her home, they said it wasn't enough to indicate that a crime was committed, but there was blood DNA of another male individual that's associated with the family that was found in her house, as well as my mom's blood.
Did she have a partner? Was there a romantic relationship going on with anybody at that time?
Nope. She was very much single. And again, her and my dad had split probably 15 years previous, very amicable. She didn't have any relationship red flags, anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Where is the gold? This reported gold.
So
It is
police,
some, it is somewhere. You don't have to give me
yeah, yeah.
it exists. The gold
It
exists
existed,
and it
we'll
is
say.
somewhere.
Right. There are records of people cashing in large amounts and yeah, without going into too much detail, there's a lot I know and a lot that I just want to protect the integrity of the investigation. It's still open, it's still active.
Right.
But a lot of behaviors of certain individuals that were very close to her were extremely alarming now looking back and now 6 years later. And it all makes sense looking back. Like I said, it's almost like Pirates of the Caribbean, but junkies and mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be transparent.
There's
Yeah,
a lot of questionable players in this case.
a lot of questionable players and a lot of players that lack integrity and, you know, emotional regulation and self control. And I think that plays a big factor into it.
What has your experience been like being a regular everyday citizen and thrown into this new world that nobody is prepared for? No, there's no playbook for this. You are now tasked with your family member of someone who's missing. You've put on these reluctantly put on these, investigative hats that you're now trying to protect the legacy of your mom. You're trying to protect the privacy of your own family.
100%.
What does that look like?
Well, kind of as I mentioned earlier, you feel somewhat isolating being a victim of a family member that's, missing. It's this ambiguous loss. You can't prepare yourself. You essentially try to make up scenarios in your head of what you think might have happened just to try to cope and to try to grieve. And I was an ER nurse for so many years. Like, I've seen trauma, I've seen bad things, I've thrived in that environment. But when it actually happens to you, I think the only thing you can really do is learn to grow from it and learn to appreciate what you have and realize that life truly is disposable. And there are a lot of hurt humans, and hurt people like to hurt people. And it's been really eye-opening, but honestly, it's taught me a lot about myself. I've grown a lot. I feel like it's prepared me to be a better mother and a better person. It's made me realize the close relationships that I have and people that care about me are so important. And it humbles you in a sense that when something tragic happens to you, you know who your circle is and you know who your players are. And it does humble you. I mean, as much as this is a disaster in itself, like, it's taught us a lot. we're learning to grow. We're still learning. Like, can't wrap your brain around the what ifs. Like, I have to try to explain to my three children that, what happened to Granny, and I don't even know. It's a hard thing to go through, but ultimately we just have to keep moving forward. We have to have this common mission to seek justice, seek the truth, and I believe the answers are there. I believe that it's a solvable case. I think it's just going to take somebody that, really wants to reinvestigate and put pressure on people that need pressure.
What is your relationship with investigators at this time? Do you get regular updates? Do you check in with them? Do they reach out to you? What does that look like?
The state police have had a lot of turnaround on our case. I think she's had 5 detectives. So I'm honestly not even sure which state police is in charge of it now. I do occasionally am in contact with the assistant district attorney. They assure me that it's active, but again,
Mhm.
as far as, Hanson police, I think they did what they could for what they had, but ultimately, I think they were in over their heads. I think they needed more resources. I think it hasn't been easy, but I'm learning to try to navigate this process without blaming anybody or putting anybody at fault. But, here we are 6 years later, and you do start to lose hope. Like, will this ever be solved? Will we ever know where she is? Will we ever get answers?
Mhm.
I don't know. I can try to remain hopeful and optimistic that yes, we will.
Mhm.
But the reality is, I don't know.
Has your family, have you or I guess you or your brother in this case, have you submitted your DNA to the database so in the event that someone is located and if it is your mom, you can be put in
Yes.
touch?
I actually went to that missing person event in Boston,
Good.
and they did
How we
my DNA.
That's how
So,
we met. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So they said, if she's ever found on state, across state lines, she's in NAMIS already, which is the National Database for Missing People. Her DNA is already uploaded in there, as well as mine and my brother's. So anything we can do to help.
What do you think in your gut happened?
I think somebody thought she had money, which I don't think she had. I think there was drugs involved. I think there was rage involved. I've noticed a lot of behaviors of certain individuals change drastically, and money being a motive for a lot of things. I think somebody went in there. There was no car in the driveway, mind you. It was at the shop. Her lights were on, so obviously it was late at night. I think somebody came in unannounced. Neighbors did overhear an argument of 2 males fighting with her the night she went missing.
Mhm.
And some have reported hearing fights of gold, like, where's the gold? She lives in a very tiny dead end street. The houses are super close. So there was something definitely happened, whether it was full rage or accidental, and then they panicked. I don't know. I try to come up with these scenarios in my head,
Mhm.
just for my own clarity, but the reality is I don't know. Her fitted sheet was missing. Her shoes weren't there. So it's almost like she walked off. We couldn't find her purse. She had a brown bag that was never recovered, as long with her ID and everything.
Mhm.
So it's almost like she could have walked off, but then also seeing the blood droplets in the house could make me believe there was more of a struggle. I'm not sure.
What's most important for you, Lena, that people know about your mom? What's most important? What do you feel like gets overlooked the most about your mom's story?
I feel like throughout all of this, people have been projecting or, spinning their own theories about what they think may have happened to my mom. And I think some of the stuff that they say is true and accurate, but I think a lot of it is, very hurtful and it's baseless. It's
Mhm.
only disrupting the case. I feel like there's a lot, again, there's going to be speculation on any case naturally. So what I've learned is try to just to keep her story out there, speak my truths. And ultimately the goal is to get justice for my mom. And I honestly am not going to stop until we have answers.
Amen. I know that you have a connection to Shayna and Light the Way, which is an incredible organization that has taught me a lot about advocacy and supporting families just like yours. And I hope you'll continue to reach out for help and support through someplace like Light the Way. I am here to support you in any way I can. We are, when I say we, the ladies that you met at the state police unresolved case day, myself, Dr. Myers, Melanie McLaughlin, who also is a friend of a missing boy from many, many years ago. And that's how we sort of came together. What we want to do with this organization, that this advocacy organization we have started in Massachusetts, is because of families like yours, because of stories like yours. You know, I talk to families and they say, we had no idea what to do. We didn't know who to talk to. We didn't know where to go. I don't want that for you. I don't want families, first of all, I don't want families to have to ever experience this. But in the event that this does happen, that you have the access to information on where to go, who to contact, what are some of the things that you're able to do, some of those resources. So that's one of the things we're trying to establish.
And that's wonderful. It, again, like you said, people's, what do you do in this situation? But knowing that there's other people that, can relate to you and, that live this every day, it's, I look at Mara Mari's sister in awe and, people like that who've never given up 20 years later. And it's sad that that has to be her life mission. And it seems unfair, but the reality is that people need to be held accountable. Like, you can't make rash decisions and not expect there to be consequences.
And the reactions of people are also telling, right? The reactions that you're seeing
100%.
from certain instances
100%.
are very telling. If I can be a part, because this isn't about me, but if I can be a part of something that helps families like yours feel less alone, that's what I want to do.
And I appreciate that.
Going forward, if there, and I know that the anniversary is coming up, if there's something that we could do, we could organize something, whether that's in Hanson, you know, these are things that we could talk about. I would like to help you.
Awesome.
It's something that we can do around the anniversary. When's her birthday?
November 27th.
Okay, that's another date. That's another date to target, just to make sure that we keep her case and her face out there.
I
Uh,
don't want anybody to forget. Like, she deserves justice just more than anybody else. It's
right. She's somebody's mom. She's somebody's grandma. She's somebody's sister. She's somebody's auntie. She's, you know, we don't need to talk about what those relationships look like, and that's okay. But the fact of the matter is she lived, loved, had you and your brother and your and your children, her grandchildren. This is all very important that we make sure we recognize that.
100%.
She is missing. We can speculate and we can say all the things that we think happen, but at the end of the day, none of that is truly helpful without trying to find out, get to the bottom of what happened. And
Exactly.
in doing that, we need to be as factual as possible. So that's why it's important for me to reach out to you, because you can tell the story of what happened in
Right.
a way that is certainly respectful of your mom and what she went through, and to know that some of the narratives and the noise surrounding this are just taking away from the real story, is that your mom is missing.
I completely agree. It's completely distracting from the fact that we're dealing with a missing person, and people's need to spread falsehood says, far more about their character than mine. And I'm trying to remain humble. I'm trying to remain hopeful. And ultimately, I'm not going to give up until we have answers. So
Amen.
I don't care what people think. My whole entire life has been hard. I don't expect it to get easier at any point, but that's okay. I think it builds character. And I think having these life experiences, even though not warranted or wanted, I think it's helped me to become a better person and to grow. And it really has. It's been a lot, but I'm not going away. And
You're still smiling, and that's important because when you talk about your mom, I can
mhm,
see the love. I can see, you've shared, there's difficulty there, but despite all that, she's your mom and you love her and you're not going to give up on her.
100%.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I have some other questions that I want to ask you. When was she born?
She was born November 27th, 1964.
Was she born in Quincy?
She was born, I think, at St. Elizabeth, so Boston.
What were some of the things that your mom loved? Did she have a favorite color?
She liked purple. She really enjoyed drinking tea. She would have like 20 cups a day. Like I said, she was really simple. She enjoyed her pup. She enjoyed her grandchildren. She enjoyed arts and crafts. She was very creative. She, would allow you to get messy and play with the glitter and everything else that comes with that. Like she was a good person. She was her own worst enemy. And I think, maybe growing up in the environment that she did kind of affected that. But ultimately, she was a harmless person. She didn't have a mean bone in her body. She never really talked bad about anybody.
Did she have some favorite music or bands that she enjoyed?
She liked like the Rolling Stones, like classic rock, Metallica, all the hard rock.
Mhm.
She enjoyed it all.
Cool. I ask a lot of that stuff because it helps humanize them.
Yeah.
These are things that people don't know. It's like where'd she grow up? She grew up in Quincy. Where was she born? She was born in Boston, in Brighton, right? She loved music. She loved her favorite color was purple. And also what I do is I make a flyer with photographs of her and information. And oftentimes if I know someone's favorite color, I'll add the favorite color in there. It's just one of the many things that we do just as another means to talk about that person and another thing that can be shared, another flyer, another way to be an everyday advocate that people can share and learn some of the factual information about your mom's case. I've been doing this long, not my background, you probably don't know this. My background, I was on rock radio for more than 20 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, I don't know, your mother probably listened to me on the radio if she like
What
classic rock.
station was it?
I was on the last station I was on was WZLX.
Okay, yes.
Because I'm from Boston. I'm from the area too. I was on WFNX, I was on BCN, I was on ZLX. I did, a couple of other things throughout that. But music is a big part of my background. And when I got into podcasting, I love true crime. I love all of that. I've learned to really, I always did look at it as humanity. I never looked at it as an exploitative kind of thing to just take fake information just to get clicks, which happens way too much.
Way too much.
Um, I want to tell the story. I want to tell an accurate story. I want to tell a compassionate story. And I want to humanize the person we're talking about and make sure families like your family, you, the daughter, I want to make sure that you know that we're on your side.
I appreciate it. It really does. It means a lot.
Thank you, Lena. I know these conversations are difficult for families. I know families want to have them because they want nothing more than to get the information out about their missing loved one. It has been nearly 6 years since Sandra Crispo was last seen. At the time of her disappearance, Sandra did not have a cell phone. There has been no activity on any of her accounts. She had no health issues. She was single. Information is needed in Sandra's case. You can contact the Hanson Police Department, 781-293-4625. Mass State Police Detectives at 508-894-2600. Sandra's family would like to know where she is, what happened to her. She has grandsons at home waiting for her. Thank you for listening. My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. I talk about New England crime stories. I talk about history. And advocacy. Advocacy is key in the work that I do. I try to be one of the helpers. It's really difficult for families to navigate these things. And I never want to be someone that makes it more painful for families who are going through this. Please follow the show at Crime of the Truest Kind on, well, everything. Bye-bye. Lock your goddamn doors.